Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. It's just medicine for my child. Words that hung in the stale air of Courtroom 16. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence like a knife. The law doesn't care about your reasons, only your actions. That's when Robert Downey Jr. uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn faces of the evening court. The young mother's hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled tissue, her shoulders hunched forward under the weight of desperation, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. Around her, the gallery sat in uncomfortable silence, eyes averted, smartphones glowing in the dimness. The case should have been routine, another number to process before closing. But as the prosecutor demanded an example be made, something shifted in the room. The Iron Man actor who had come to support a friend wasn't wearing his superhero suit, but his jaw clenched with the same determination that had once saved the cinematic universe. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:30 p.m., the hour when most courtrooms had emptied. But here, under the unforgiving lights, justice continued its mechanical rhythm. Sarah Miller, 28, single mother of a 6-year-old with a rare immune disorder, stood alone before the bench. No lawyer beside her, she couldn't afford one. The security footage had been clear, her trembling hands slipping a $342 prescription medication into her purse after her insurance denial. $342 or your child's life, she had whispered during questioning. What choice did I have? The prosecutor, Douglas Warner, straightened his already immaculate tie. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never known true desperation. The law exists precisely to prevent individuals from making their own choices about right and wrong. Theft endangers the very fabric of society. His words fell like hammers in the quiet room. Robert Downey Jr. had almost skipped coming to court tonight. His friend, an environmental attorney finalizing paperwork for a charity foundation, had asked him to tag along for the 15-minute errand. In and out, his friend had promised. But that was 2 hours ago, before a clerk recognized Downey and ushered them into the courtroom's back row while they waited. Now, as the drama unfolded, the actor found himself unable to look away. He knew something about second chances, about the razor-thin line between damnation and redemption, about systems that crushed people at their weakest moments. His own journey from addiction and incarceration to becoming one of Hollywood's most beloved figures hadn't been without help. People who saw his humanity when the system saw only his crimes. He shifted uncomfortably as the judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, peered down at Sarah Miller's file with practiced indifference. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, warming to his theme, if we allow emotional circumstances to justify criminal behavior, where do we draw the line? Today it's medication. Tomorrow it's something else. The defendant knowingly broke the law. The pharmacy lost inventory. Insurance rates increase. Society pays the price. He gestured toward Sarah, whose shoulders curved inward as though she could disappear within herself. Leniency here sends the wrong message to others who might consider similar actions. The judge nodded almost imperceptibly. A few spectators murmured their agreement, the comfortable judging the desperate. A court officer suppressed a yawn. Just another evening in the machine of justice. But as the judge opened her mouth to speak, Downey felt something volcanic building in his chest. The same righteous anger that had fueled his most powerful performances. the same fire that had once nearly consumed him and then forged him anew. Without planning to, he found himself rising to his feet. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Your Honor, if I may. The voice cut through the courtroom like a spotlight, and every head turned. Robert Downey Jr. stood tall, his presence commanding the room in an instant. The whispers began immediately. Is that really him? Iron Man? What's he doing here? The judge blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off her script. The prosecutor's mouth hung slightly open, his next argument forgotten. Sir, this is not a public forum. Please be seated or you'll be removed, the judge said, recovering her composure, though her voice betrayed her curiosity. With respect, Your Honor, I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm here as a citizen who can't sit silently while watching this. His eyes locked with Sarah Miller's, and in that moment a current of understanding passed between them, two souls who had faced different abysses. I've sat where Ms. Miller is sitting. I've stood before judges who had to decide whether I deserved punishment or a chance. The difference was I had resources. I had privilege. I had people fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. The courtroom had transformed. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing the moment. The prosecutor's face flushed with indignation. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Downey has no standing in this case. Maybe not legally, Downey conceded, his voice steady, but morally, every one of us has standing here. He gestured around the courtroom. We're watching a mother being prosecuted for trying to save her child's life in a system that failed them both. The judge's gavel struck once. Mr. Downey, while I appreciate your concern, do you? He interrupted, his tone respectful but unyielding. Because I've spent time in institutions where concern looks very different than this. He moved closer to Sarah, who stood frozen in disbelief. You know what I see here? I see a system prosecuting desperation instead of addressing its cause. I see a mother who made an impossible choice that none of us sitting in comfort should judge unless we face that same impossible moment. The prosecutor stepped forward, his polished veneer cracking. This is emotional manipulation, Your Honor. Mr. Downey is using his celebrity status to speak for someone who has no voice, Downey finished. Yes, I am. And I'll pay for whatever was taken. I'll pay 10 times over. In fact, he reached for his wallet, a gesture both literal and symbolic. This isn't about the money. The prosecutor's voice rose sharply. Exactly, Downey replied, his eyes glinting with intensity. It never was. It's about compassion versus protocol. It's about a system that forces a mother to choose between her child's life and the law. By now, the courtroom had abandoned all pretense of routine. The spectators sat forward in their seats. Court officers exchanged glances, uncertain whether to intervene. The ambient sounds of the courthouse faded away as if the room existed in its own dimension of time and consequence. Sarah Miller's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. And somewhere in the back, someone started a slow, deliberate clap that hung in the air like a challenge. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. Order! The judge's gavel came down hard, silencing the growing murmur. She fixed Downey with a stern gaze. Mr. Downey, you are overstepping. This court follows procedures for a reason. I understand procedure, Your Honor. I've been processed by plenty of them. His voice carried no bitterness, only conviction. But sometimes, procedure becomes a shield that protects us from looking at the human cost of our systems. He turned to face the courtroom now, addressing everyone. Ms. Miller didn't steal for profit or pleasure. She stole because a piece of paper from an insurance company said her child's life wasn't worth saving. The prosecutor scrambled to regain control. "Your Honor, this grandstanding is inappropriate. Mr. Downey is not an attorney nor a character witness. He has no connection to this case." "That's where you're wrong," Downey said, his voice dropping to a resonant quiet that somehow filled the room more completely than any shout. "I'm connected to everyone who's ever stood where she stands, by my past, by my humanity, by the grace that was extended to me when I needed it most." The courtroom had become unnaturally still. Even the judge seemed caught in the gravity of the moment, her gavel resting silent on its sound block. Downey moved closer to Sarah, who looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I was given second chances when I didn't deserve them," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I violated more than pharmacy policies. I broke laws. I betrayed trusts. I squandered opportunities that others would die for. And I was shown mercy, not just by courts, but by people who chose to see my potential instead of my failures." He turned back to the judge, his eyes alight with purpose. That mercy wasn't weakness. It wasn't a miscarriage of justice. It was the very definition of justice, seeing the whole person, not just the worst moment of their life. He gestured toward Sarah. "Do we really believe that criminalizing a mother's desperation makes anyone safer? That her child should suffer or die because she couldn't navigate a broken system? Is that the society we want to be?" The prosecutor shuffled his papers, visibly uncomfortable as the narrative slipped from his control. The judge removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose, a rare gesture of humanity breaking through judicial stoicism. Sarah Miller stood straighter now, as if Downey's words had restored something vital within her. "Your Honor," Downey said, his voice gentler now, "I'm not asking you to ignore the law. I'm asking you to remember its purpose. Laws exist to protect us from harm, not to inflict it. To build a better society, not tear families apart." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the bench. "I have resources, connections to foundations that help families access medication. Let me make this right, not by erasing consequences, but by creating better options." The judge studied him for a long moment, then looked past him to Sarah Miller. Something passed between the two women, a recognition perhaps of battles fought in different arenas but with similar stakes. The silence in the courtroom had weight and texture, like the moment before a verdict when fates hang suspended between worlds. When the judge finally spoke, her voice carried none of its earlier mechanical detachment. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. Ms. Miller, Mr. Downey, and counsel, please remain. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." What happened in the judge's chambers wasn't recorded on any camera phone or court transcript. But when they emerged 30 minutes later, the change was palpable. The judge's face had softened. The prosecutor walked stiffly, his earlier certainty replaced by a complex mix of emotions. And Sarah Miller, she moved differently, as if some crushing weight had been partially lifted from her shoulders. The judge returned to the bench and addressed the courtroom, which had somehow grown even more crowded during the recess. "In light of the circumstances and after consultation with all parties, this court has reached a decision." She looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Miller will complete 100 hours of community service at the Children's Hospital Foundation. The charges will be held in abeyance and dismissed upon completion." She paused, then added something that wasn't in any legal textbook. "And this court wishes your child a full recovery." Outside the courthouse, camera flashes punctuated the night air. What had begun as an unremarkable evening in a routine courtroom had transformed into something else entirely. Robert Downey Jr. stood beside Sarah Miller on the courthouse steps, his hand lightly touching her shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. He didn't seek the spotlight, but he didn't shy away from it either, understanding that visibility could transform this moment from a private victory to a public conversation. No one should have to choose between their child's life and breaking the law, he told the hastily gathered reporters. Today isn't about me or any celebrity influence. It's about recognizing that justice without compassion isn't justice at all. He didn't mention the private arrangement he'd made to ensure that Sarah's son would receive not just the medication he needed now, but comprehensive care moving forward. Some acts of kindness belong to the giver and receiver alone. The story spread like wildfire across social media. Justice and mercy trended for days. Discussions erupted about healthcare access, economic inequality, and the purpose of legal systems. Pharmaceutical companies faced renewed pressure about pricing. Fundraisers sprouted for families in similar situations. A state senator announced plans to introduce Sarah's Law to create emergency medication access programs. And, in a small apartment across town, a mother sat beside her sleeping child, his breathing easier now with proper medication. Sarah Miller stroked her son's hair, thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought Robert Downey Jr. into her courtroom that night. She remembered something he'd whispered to her as they parted. Your courage wasn't in breaking the law. It was in refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others. In that quiet moment of motherhood, watching her child breathe, she understood that sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways, wearing unexpected faces, reminding us that our humanity connects us more deeply than any system ever could. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.